Hi, my name is Greg Simpson. I'm a minister in the United Church of Canada, and I want to share with you a sermon from this past week. It was All Saints Sunday, a time where we celebrate and honor the lives of those who have gone before. This is a very difficult and grief-filled thing to do. And very often, grief is something we are expected to do either really quickly or in the quiet, dark moments of our lives. And this Sunday, we wanted to give time and space to let grief be. Let it be something we honor and sit with. So I'm going to share that sermon with you. And at the end, I'm going to leave you with a couple of ideas or tips in case you find yourself in a grief-filled time in your life right now. Here's the sermon.
We're reading from this today because these words could not be more fitting. This is from the book of Wisdom of Solomon, 3:1-9. But the souls of the righteous are in the hand of God, and no torment will ever touch them. In the eyes of the foolish, they seem to have died, and their departure was thought to be a disaster, and their going from us to be their destruction, but they are at peace. For though in the sight of others they were punished, their hope is full of immortality. Having been disciplined a little, they will receive great good, because God tested them and found them worthy of himself. Like gold in the furnace, he tried them, and like a sacrificial burnt offering, he accepted them. In the time of their visitation, they will shine forth and run like sparks through the stubble. They will govern nations and rule over peoples, and the Lord will reign over them forever. Those who trust in him will understand truth, and the faithful will abide with him in love, because grace and mercy are upon his holy ones, and he watches over his elect. There's part of me that feels that we could just close the book and walk away and let those words hang. They do such a beautiful job of addressing the hardship and the difficulty that we who are still here have around processing loss. I love that it speaks of both foolishness, of disaster, of destruction, and in the midst of all of that, there is peace. Peace for those who are gone. Peace for those of us who are missing people as we gently move our lives towards a place of acceptance. I realized when I was stitching this together that this sermon today is pretty much just going to be a rehash of a stock funeral sermon. And I think there's some value in that. I have walked with many, many families through the process of the hardship of losing someone they loved. And I'll admit, I haven't read these words very frequently. And I'm a little bit bummed because I think that these words have done more for me in the last 2 weeks to help me unpack and blossom some of the reality of our relationship with those who have gone before. The foolish see the ending of their lives as being destruction and disaster. Yet for those who are gone, they are at peace. We live in a society that tells us ignore death altogether. If it's possible to never speak of death until you're already gone, then count that as success. And I think that's quite damaging to us as individuals and damaging to us as a society. For death is real. Now, Margaret just talked about the only other reality in our lives, taxes. Taxes and death are about the only two things we're never going to get out of. Now, I know we generally try to avoid talking about taxes, but every year it's going to smack us in the face. But somehow death we get away without addressing. I think there might be some healthiness in us to face this head on. For death is something that we all will face. We will lose somebody we loved. And for some of us, the way that we process that will be to pretend it didn't happen. Sure, we'll go through the steps of going to the funeral and figuring out all the details, and then we'll lock that piece of our brain and stuff it far away and say, I'm not ready to handle or process that. And that's okay. But my prayer for you is that someday you do take the time and find the Spirit space to address it. For that loss is as real a part of you as any other thing that has happened to you. And here we have these beautiful words reaching into that desire to ignore it, and we're reminded that those who we loved are at peace. It doesn't spend much time at all trying to describe what comes after this. And in fact, if you talk to lots of Christians, they've got all sorts of theories and all sorts of ideas. They can draw pictures. They can describe to you what the thing that happens after this looks like. But I have to remind you, they haven't been there yet. And there are so many layers of tradition and stories that have been stacked on top of the Bible. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some parts of the Bible that do address what comes next, but they are also very fantastical and dreamlike sequences, not particularly meant to be taken at every jot and tittle, every literal reality, but they speak of something beautiful and filled with peace. They speak in such hyperbole because we don't know how good it could be. And yet we who are here are stuck in the awful grief of missing, the awful process of getting on with our lives without them. When I sit with families, very often before this service, I sit with them and we talk about the stories of their loved ones. And I remind them, and I give them my card and I say, it might feel like I'm just doing the service, but I promise you there's going to be some random Tuesday, 2.5 months from now, where it all comes crashing down. Call me then. And if you're not going to call me, call a friend, call a loved one, call your therapist. Process through this. Death, my friends, is real, and it is hard. But the other word there that jumped out at me, and I want to unpack it a little bit because it speaks of immortality. Let me find this line again. For though in the sight of others they were punished, their hope is full of immortality. We see their death as punishment because it punishes us to no longer have them with us, but for them, their life is full, their hope is full of immortality. We need to remember for a moment that the timing when this was written, the discussions and the deep philosophical conversations were in a Hellenistic conversation, and immortality was not about living forever. It was about everything that you have done and said and the impact you've made carrying on forever, which we know that to be true as well. Each one of us who has lost somebody carries a piece of them with us. There aren't very many days that go by that I don't remember my grandma Edna, my dad's mom. She was unquestionably the kindest human on the face of the planet. I know some of you had really good grandmas. I had the best one. I hate to break it to you. When she died, I remember, I'm probably going to get through this. When she died, a couple days later, my sister and I were texting because we couldn't actually pick up the phone and talk about it. And we committed to each other that with Grandma gone, we were going to try and take up the tiniest bit of her torch. And that was to see the good in everyone. I mean, everyone. There was not an impolite or harsh word that ever passed Edna Simpson's lips. I have failed, let's be clear. I am sucking at that, but every day I try a little bit more to carry Edna into the world through me. I share that story only because I know that each and every one of you have some story that matches that. Your great uncle, whose sense of humor was sometimes inappropriate, but he always had the right moment to lighten up what was going on in the day. Or your dear cousin who would literally give the shirt off their back to whoever needed it. All of you have a story that fits that you try to carry their lives with you in a special way. Many of you were touched as those names rolled by because you're remembering those people. And yes, as the names come by, you've got a picture of their face in your head, but more importantly, you've got the feeling of them in you. Their memories, their presence, the way they behaved, the things that were wonderful, sometimes the things were not so wonderful. These are humans after all. And as those names came up, you were reminded and you stepped into a moment, and it was difficult, and it was beautiful, and it was love. See, on a day when we are addressing endings of lives, endings of relationships between us and those who have gone before, I think it's critically important that we weave together our stories of these loved ones with things that will never die, their memories, their love. The love that we felt from them when we were with them, and the love that we shared with them. This will never die. This is the immortality as this writer speaks of. We get to carry their lives in our lives forever. I hope that if we're going to talk about taxes at least once a year, that we would at least once a year bother to talk about death, the way that it impacts us, the dark and difficulty of living our lives without the one we loved so dearly, and the beauty of knowing that their lives are immortal in us. May that be the way that we remember them. Amen.
If that was hard for you to watch, I want to say thank you for sticking it out to hear. Grief is something that we're taught to ignore or push aside. And by sitting in your grief, I honor that this is hard work you're doing. So I'm going to invite you to turn that into something tangible that you do. Maybe go light a candle and just think about your loved one, or make a few notes on a piece of paper. You don't have to call it journaling if you don't want to, but just write down some of the stuff you're feeling, or some of those beautiful memories that keep them alive, keep them immortal in your life. Friends, this is a hard thing that we live through, this thing called life. And I want to thank you all for being here, being open to grief. I love you all. We'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.